Rachel is doing her PhD on all matters CTC. I think well, she may include it, but if not the first, was one of the first CTC radiographers in the country, possibly the world, and probably knows more about CTC than many a radiologist and many a GI radiologist, I would say. So huge expertise there, developing the clinical specialty and more importantly, and what we're going to hear about today, training up other people to read CTC. And you know, it's a fundamental part of a lot of what we do in gastroenterology, and particularly in our area. There's a great collaboration between the CTC experts and endoscopy. So I have a huge fondness for Rachel and the work that you do and the team. Rachel's been at the Trust since 2003, at St Mark's since 2009. So you get lots of badges for that, Rachel. And you've also had probably the badge for the most number of supervisors during one PhD, currently supervised by Stuart Taylor and Steve Halligan officially at UCH with our fantastic colleagues there, but also with some input from Anu, clearly another CTC guiding light, and previously Dave Burling before he retired, along with a few other people along the way. So Rachel, over to you. Really looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and for the lovely introduction. Good morning, everyone. So thank you for inviting me to speak today at Grand Rounds about training and education in CT colonography. I'm lucky enough to be able to investigate this interesting topic as part of the areas for my PhD. And I'm going to talk to you today about the creation of the first National CT Colonography Academy. It's the first of its kind anywhere in the world. I won't go into who I am because Sharon's very kindly already done that, but this will be my second time discussing some of the work that we have been doing. So what is a CTC, just for anyone on the call who doesn't know? So a fully informed patient is given medication to cleanse and tag any remaining bowel feces that may occur. They're consented by a trained person who carries out the test on the day within the imaging department itself, the CT scanner, but they're not consented within the CT scanner, they're consented outside. They're brought into the CT scanner if they agree to go ahead with the test, and then they put into different positions depending on how we need to move them around during the test to move any fluid that is there. But they're also had a rectal tube inserted into their back passage, and they're insufflated using a machine with carbon dioxide. A fully informed trained person should carry out this test because there is risk to it, and the patient should be informed about the risk to the test and the benefits of having the test as well. So hopefully, if it's done well and they're cleansed well, we should get images such as in the bottom right-hand of the screen. So we know that it's now recognised over barium enema for the radiological investigation for colonic neoplasia detection. But the diagnostic accuracy and therefore ultimately the patient outcomes are directly influenced by the examination itself, so the quality of it, the reader experience and the competence of that person reading and performing it. So things such as this 25mm centrally depressed cancer can be seen in the ascending colon, but it can also be missed if the distension or the prep is poor. And things such as the subtle T1 cancer at the hepatic flexure could definitely be missed with poor technique, and it was only actually seen in the 2D imaging on only one slice in the coronal, and therefore perceptual errors by the interpreter often occur in CTC and much smaller lesions such as these. We know that the data shows a variation in the practice occurring in CTC, so we know CTC is not being performed very well out there. This paper is a systematic review of CTC when used as a secondary test after positive FOBT, incorporated data from 5 studies involving 622 patients, which showed 89% sensitivity for polyps and cancers greater than 6mm, and a relatively low specificity in 75% at CTC. But there was a notable heterogeneity of the data seen in keeping with the variation practice that we know is out there. Another meta-analysis in 2020, 14 papers covering over 3,000 patients, looked at high-risk colorectal cancer patients. It showed a lower sensitivity at 87% with a higher specificity at 90% for detecting polyps greater than 6mm. Again, there was heterogeneity between the data, given the backing up the evidence of the variation between the centres out there. What does this variation potentially mean then? So the systematic review in 2018 on post-imaging colorectal cancers by a Barra team showed that 2/3 of missed cancers at CTC were due to perception error, so the failure to see them in the first place on the image. However, post-imaging colorectal cancer rates were shown to be higher on CTC bowel cancer screening patients at 6.5%, surprisingly, in 2019. But they were still comparable both to the post-colonoscopy colorectal published data in 2019, but again, only if it is done well. Radiographers and radiologists are not subject to accreditation for performance or interpretation of CTC presently, which is in sharp contrast with other screening programs using imaging such as Performs for breast and the JAG for endoscopy, which both have accreditation, annual self-assessment and feedback processes. Without good techniques in distension, images on the left are seen, which create the false positive cancers. This area of underdistension on the left looks like cancer, but it's actually spasm. So poor technique can hide and both mimic pathology. Good technique, such as the one on the right, helps us achieve good distension, which makes preparation easier for the reporter. However, even with good technique and prep, flat polyps are often the ones that are not perceived on CTC, which is often down to interpretation technique, where you're not using a combined 2D, which is the top image, and 3D, which is the bottom image on the right. They're just not trained to look for them correctly. So what's the current knowledge about the variation in practice then? Breast screening and endoscopy and bowel cancer screening have shown that patient experience and safety outcomes are improved when training and accreditation were introduced. But a perfect study by the team here at St Mark's, run by Dr. Obaro, was a prospective multi-centre cluster randomised controlled trial carried out in 2022. It showed a huge variation of sensitivity at baseline of radiologists involved, many of whom were already reporting CTCs in practice in the NHS, with a median carrier experience of 500 to 999 CTCs. Overall, perfect training intervention showed sustained improvement in detection of the clinically relevant neoplasia in the group, who had just 1 day of training only and feedback given throughout. And this improvement was seen independent of any prior career experience. This study proved lack of training in CTC interpretation leads to perceptual error. But there is a limited availability of training, and the consensus on recommendations of what training requirements should be for radiologists and radiographers is very varied. In 2022, the literature covered 20 years of international guidelines and published literature on training methodology for CTC. The international guidance recommend training before independent interpretation, but it was very varied, showing the recommendation anywhere between 50 to 300 previous numbers. Only one showed a minimum training requirement and audit for accreditation, and that was the Australian and New Zealand team. And one, which was the UK BUZCAR, had a quantitative performance indicators for established interpreters listed, but none dictated the completion of a specific type of training package over a period for independent reporting. The literature itself revealed 19 papers, of 9 of which assessed diagnostic accuracy pre and post training. 7 of these showed significant improvement in sensitivity after training, and 7 used only a single expert trainer within the programme itself. Only one emphasised individual feedback on reader performance, and that was the perfect study, with some but not all of the papers giving sequential feedback after each case via unblinded formal reports. Overall, there is a wide variation in training requirements and processes seen in the literature. Training improved sensitivity in readers, however, but sensitivity was impact was variable throughout the papers. The consensus agreement, though, is needed on the best way to train and assess readers once they're trained. The perfect study looked at radiologists, but what do we know about radiographers reporting? Because we do know that they're reporting CTC out there. Systematic review in 2013 looked at radiographers performing and interpreting CTC and found 8 articles, which combined the data from 80 radiographers. It showed lower performance than radiologists, with sensitivity for 75% for large polyps and 68% for smaller polyps, which was measured at 5 ml and above, not the 6 ml and above as the radiologist pool were. Only 3 studies had data to work out pooled estimates, which showed specificity at 74% and sensitivity at 76%. The data again displayed a wide variation in results, but for those who had been trained with greater than 50 cases, it showed a sensitivity of 78% compared to 57% of those who had received less than 50 cases when training. So therefore, provided with adequate training and experience, radiographers have a potential role towards the final report of a CT colonography. In January 2023, we drew up the CTC and lower cancer pathway plan for the next 10 years, which was supported by multiple professional bodies. It stated that a national CTC training and accreditation programme for radiographers and radiologists should be commissioned to support and monitor training across the NHS. And a curated national cloud-based CTC case repository should be developed for training and accreditation in interpretation. Fortunately, we had, in 2020, on the back of the endoscopy COVID recovery plan in London, been funded to develop a national CTC training and accreditation programme, and subsequently called the National CTC Academy, by Health Education England and NHS England funded us. It was started here at St Mark's with the support of BUZGA and all the major CTC stakeholders in the UK. And it's different to other training out there, as it's multi-professionally backed initiative and run, and to increase the quality and capacity of CTC was our aim. And therefore, the National CTC Academy was established in 2020. So we incorporated lessons from the literature. We developed training methods to expand CTC training capacity and established a cloud-based repository for cases for training. We implemented assessments to ascertain competence, and I have been investigating the programme's efficiency and outputs from them. This is our faculty and our contributors to Module A, and we have a National Clinical Advisory Board, with some of which are on the call today. Thank you if you have joined. So the faculty themselves are multi-professional, made up of CTC expert trainers out there who are already running CTC courses previously. We've also had input from the radiation protection team, and we have an educational designer who's helped us develop our content into user-friendly educational output. We've also had peer review from within the UK as well of experts. So incorporating the lessons from the literature then and Perfix itself, two modules have been created. Module A is the technique side, which covers technique training. It's a combined practical and online training for radiographers and radiologists using a novel training framework. It has also established competency assessments in performing CTC. Module B is an interpretation training, which is online and mentorship versions. It covers reporting style, methodology, habits and pathology that should be looked for, with linked practice cases to each section. It has multi-choice questions and tests throughout to establish a polyp detection rate and sensitivity and specificity scores throughout. Module B is supported by Canon Medical, who host our CTC interpretation cases for us. So what does that mean for me in terms of my PhD? So I've been looking at both the technique and interpretation side over 5 projects. You'll be glad to know I'm not discussing all of those today though. The technique side is covered by the evaluation of the national training programme, which I will go through. I'm looking at the impact on the colonic distension of trainees that have been, so their distension pre and then post-training within the clinical sites. I'm doing a systematic review and meta-analysis on the radiography interpretation data that's been published, further on from the 2013 work that's been done, and looking at UK reporting practices with the national survey. And the final and the largest part of my PhD is Perfix 2, which is the performance and evaluation for CTC in symptomatic patients, and is a comparison trial of reporting radiographers and subspecialty trainee radiologists undergoing the same structured training programme. So the potential impacts of the PhD then will be hopefully to establish if this type of training methodology is viable and accepted by both professional groups, establish whether radiographers respond to interpretation training in line with radiologist responses, and increase utilisation of radiographers, hopefully therefore for interpretation, increasing the influence and raising the profile for them, and creating career progression. It will help and improve and maintain accuracy of reporters out there. The higher accuracy means less missed cancers, as we mentioned previously, and anguish to patients therefore, and decreased financial impact to the NHS because of these. Better trained and larger CTC workforce will hopefully occur, which means detecting colorectal cancer earlier at a lower cost may occur, with speeding up diagnostic results for patients also, potentially offloading the colonoscopy backlog workloads that they have as well. So improved patient outcomes and experience as a direct result of evidence-based research is hoped for, and it will guide future training models for CTC interpretation, and migrating from face-to-face to traditional models that we had to online training for reporting CTC, enabling more people to be trained and decrease inequality between people training in the CTC reporting, and increase the available resources therefore. So today I'm going to answer, do educational interventions in technique and interpretation make a difference to practice, covering the Module A technique side. So our aim as the programme was to address that training gap, create evidence-based online training programme with the multi-professional team I've mentioned, and pilot initially in London and then roll out across the England in 2022. We also did a mini pilot in Midlands, but I won't mention that today. So what did that what does the structure look like then? So there's an independent learning section on online e-learning platform, which has online content of 12 interactive training units in the pilot, which was to increase knowledge. That's an e-portfolio in a separate system in the pilot, which recorded evidence of practical experience undertaken locally, such as the 20 local case logs, patient feedback forms that we asked for, local competencies and direct observation of procedural skills that have been undertaken with their local trainer as well. So the system is designed to come in as either a trainee, so you have very limited or no knowledge of CTC, or as a trainer arm where you have fairly good experience in CTC and are likely to be the lead for that specific site then going forward. So we train those trainers also how to train within a clinical environment, the trainers course. So once someone is either supervised by their local trainer if they're a trainee, or by a local mentor if they were a trainer coming through, they are then assessed formally by a final summative evaluation by an expert radiographer who came into their site and did a formal direct observation of procedural skills on a clinical list with them, which is completely unique to us and never been done before by any course, even in a PGC. And they also then carried out a verbal online viva. Here's an example of some of the slides from the on the slide for some of the pages that we did in the underpinning knowledge units. Each section is broken down into things such as pathology, navigation, and grouped together to help facilitate the learner's experience. So the aim was then to establish whether we've had any impact on, by evaluating the trainees' pre and post course confidence levels in CTC knowledge and technique, establishing if training positively impacted their performance. We tested the learner's knowledge acquisition with the multi-choice questions, and we identified strengths and weakness of the training itself to help us to establish if the programme input into its design and units, which was my job to evaluate. So I evaluated in both the pilot and the post-pilot evaluation, and I'm going to share some data going forward. Our methodology was structured against the Kirkpatrick level model, looking at overall course feedback. So did learners enjoy the training? The learning side, did learning occur? So looking at multi-choice question scores and viva results. Did training change behaviour? So pre and post programme confidence scores. And did training influence performance, such as the direct observation of procedural skills? So in the pilot then, what occurred? So 16 of 19 eligible London trusts joined, of which 14 enrolled trainers and 16 enrolled trainees. 57 of the 57 radiographers enrolled overall, 41 completed the module and 37 were deemed competent for independent practice at the end, of which 13 were trainers. 4 radiographers failed the summative assessments and were offered resit assessments after the pilot itself. Of the 16 who did not complete Module A, 1 emigrated and 15 were offered the opportunity to finish the module after the pilot itself, because this was piloted right in the middle of COVID. So evaluation, the results, kind of an overview of the results then. Module A was well received by participants. 97% agreed the performance had improved, 90% would recommend the course, and 92% agreed the course quality was high. However, 64% reported the e-portfolio took far too long to complete. And they wanted a more simplified and intuitive user interface, because at the time we had 2 sections. One was an e-portfolio and one was the underpinning knowledge side. So 2 different platforms to navigate. We'd found that there was a large variation in CTC practice and service evaluation document standards out there, even within London itself, which was thought to be quite a well-established area, with lots of training having had St Mark's training in the area for a long time. And despite widely published CTC standards out there from BuzzGar and the RCR, and 51% of the people participating reported lack of sufficient time at the trust to complete the course, and they didn't really understand what they had been signing up for. So the conclusion of the pilot, it helped us establish attitudes and impacts of the performance of the new methodology, and the feedback resulted in alterations to the course and the platform to help deliver more efficient and supported learning. So applying the lessons learned from the pilot, therefore. So The initial, on the basis of feedback, we made changes. So on the initial use of the 2 digital platforms, we went over to procure 1 single digital campus. The gaps in the knowledge at the end of the course were shown by the multi-choice question, large amount of attempts, which I'll display later, and therefore 12 courses were adapted to be 17 units were adapted to be 17 online units instead to address those gaps. And we changed it to have mini quizzes at the end of each unit, but with 1 formal final MCQ covering all the topics at the end instead of multiple MCQs. The gaps in the educational content were seen in the user comments and within the DOPs and the Vivas themselves. Therefore, in the Midlands, when we did pilot in the Midlands, we had introduced going out to a centre of excellence to do some training and see what good looked like. And therefore, we implemented these, and therefore a site visit and participation in the clinical list at an expert centre for either 1 day if a trainee or 2 days if a trainer were implemented also. Going forward, we also updated our name from the National Training and Accreditation Programme to the National CT Academy. So the full module format was locked down to a 20-week course, and we also introduced a new online version for SPRs and the more experienced radiographers. Data for the online only course will not be discussed today, though. So out of the centres of excellence across England, and the map you'll also show there's 1 in Scotland, as we are in the process of opening 1 for Dundee. So 11 have opened regionally, which means less travel for enrollees, regional network for teams, in that area, and sharing best practice locally also as well as nationally. So from the full course then, which I'm going to kind of refer to the post-pilot data as, 371 people had enrolled, 30 had dropped out, although the data on there for the trainer of 18, it still needs to be clean because there's no way that we've lost 18 trainers, but we have the way that we put them onto the platform itself, I think some data issues there, so we're looking at that data. Of those, 178 have completed to date and 136 has still to complete. So going back to our Kirkpatrick model then, so looking at the pilot versus the current full course, DOPS results. So the direct observation of procedural skills were undertaken for practice with the local trainer or peer during the programme as a summative assessment at the end by us as the external assessors, which this chart shows. Of the 3 learners in the pilot who failed the external DOPS, they had not completed any local DOPS with their trainers or their peers. All of those were allowed to resit in the follow-up course, and all other trainees and trainers who passed had completed at least 8 of the local practice DOPS, and therefore we know that they're really important to have to do. And therefore, post-pilot, we've made it compulsory to complete practice DOPS prior to the final DOPS by an external assessor taking place. So in terms of the final DOPS, in the pilot, the rating for the failing of the final DOPS in the first attempt for the trainee was 7% and 9% for trainers. And in the full course, it dropped considerably to 3% for trainees and 2% for the trainer arm. Looking at pre and post confidence and knowledge scores then. Less people rated their knowledge as very poor, poor or fair after training in both the pilot and the full course. In the pilot, fair dropped from 57% to 0%, and good rose from 27% to 39%, and excellent 4% to 61%. In the current course, self-reported knowledge and understanding rose from pre-course 24% rating as good to post-course rating of 47 good, and 1% excellent to 50% as excellent post-course. That's an improvement of 23% and 49% respectively. Confidence in performing CTC, again, less people rated their knowledge as very poor or poor after training in both the pilot and the full course. And the pilot good decreased by 20% from 41 to 21% post-course, but the excellent itself rose from 8% to 79%. So that's an increase of 71%, which we were quite pleased with. In the current course, self-reported competence rose from pre-course 29% rating to good to post-course rating of 44% and 4% as excellent to 55%. So that's an improvement of 51% again. When looking at the agreed and strongly agreed scores, there was an improvement across the board in all categories on this chart shown between the pilot data and the full course data, with a 30% increase in enrollees perceiving patient satisfaction increase and 21% increase in efficiency of their work. Here's a selection of feedback comments from the full course. It mirrored our knowledge of variation in practice out there, with centres now implementing policies and consenting processes, which had never been in place before, bizarrely, and engaging with their own teams regionally and both nationally. after their Centre of Excellence visit, which was a great achievement for that regional networking that we required. So looking at the did learner transfer occur, the multi-choice questions and the vivas, in the MCQs, in the pilot, the pass mark was 100% for each of the 12 unit cases. So there was a structured questions they had to pass at the end of each. There was an average of 15 attempts to pass the anatomy one, an average of 10 attempts for drugs and contrast unit, and 9 for the patient positioning units. And there was a lot of negative feedback about the process in the surveys, which was mirrored with the data in the number of attempts seen on the chart here. In the new full course, with the structure that I said that we changed, so there was only one overarching formal multi-choice question testing at the end of all of the units. The mini scored quizzes at the end of each unit were implemented, as I said before, and this data now shows that a new average retake of 2.5 times in the radiographer group who were less experienced, and 1.5 in the SPRs, although there is a wide range in the SPR group from no retakes to 7. The new adjustments going forward, we think that will be, sorry, not we think, but is that we are dropping the pass mark to 80% in line with the PG cert, because the pass mark for this data was still at 100%, and we'll reanalyze again in a few months. In the VIRA assessments, the data here shown is for the full course. In the pilot, 25 trainees undertook the VIVA, and of which 24 passed first time. 10 of the 14 trainers who were required to undertake the VIVA all passed. The 4 that didn't were because they didn't already had PGCs, and 1 actually failed the DOPS assessment itself, so we're not eligible to sit the VIVA at this stage. In the full course, only 1 person has failed the whole course so far, having failed the VIVA resits, which therefore is less than a 1% failure rate. So looking at overall course feedback then, very quickly, the quality has remained the same between the pilot and the full course. The relevance has also remained steady at greater than 95% in positive agreement. The recommendation of the course has improved to 95% post-agreement from 90%. Positively impact has slightly dropped by 1%, but both people who strongly and very strongly disagreed regarding recommendation of the course on the previous slide also strongly disagreed that the course positively impacted their performance, and they were both radiographers. So we can't please everyone. Interested in undertaking the CTC interpretation course for Module B has, with strongly agreeing, increasing by 16% between the pilot, but overall positive responses have dropped by 3% though between the 2 courses. So outcomes then. The NCTC programme itself has won a Learning Technology Award in November 22, and Anu is pictured here with Joe Band. We were silver winners in the category of Excellence in Designer of Learning Content, and there were over 450 entries from 28 countries for the award in 23 categories. And they were selected by an independent panel of judges, and there were 11 finalists in the category that we entered, with many well-established names from the learning technology industry. We've established a single digital campus, which is working far more efficiently and with a much easier user interface for both radiographers as trainees and for the people using it to market as the assessors, and for the Centre of Excellences that also have to input to the platform. Co-delivery with the University of Suffolk has meant a postgraduate certificate in CTC is awarded upon successful completion of both Module A and Module B for radiographers, which has been a long battle, but one that we have now won. We have rolled out across England successfully, and since the pilot, we've had a further £650,000 from NHS England over 2023 to 2025 to train both radiographers and radiologists. And BUZGAR have also trained funding for registrar training to complete the module online only units for Module A. Scotland, Dundee has been set up as a Centre of Excellence, and we are rolling out ongoing from there. And Northern Ireland has just sent their 2nd trainee, and there's a rumour that a 3rd will be upcoming soon. So we've presented our data at within 4 posters out there at the UK Imaging and Oncology Conference, Achieving Excellence in Radiography Education Awards, and in the BUZGAR meeting in 2025. So what's our future plans then for the programme itself? Module A, we would like to make sure every trust performing CTD in England has been offered a funded place. We think that has been achieved this year, but we don't have formal data for that on the latest funding round that we've just sent out expressions of interest for from the NHSE money. We'd like Dundee to actually take their first trainee at the Centre of Excellence, and we'd like to formally set up a Centre of Excellence within Northern Ireland itself. We're integrating into Buzzgar, excuse me, and we'd like to make sure that the digital campus has a fully integrated e-commerce system, so we can generate further income from self-payers and from the vast interest that we've had from abroad also. We are have been instrumental in helping embed CTC training into the core curriculum for SPR trainees, and the national programme module we hope will be used going forward for that. And overall, we're hopefully looking at CTC accreditation and what that should formally look like, and helping establish the Canon network that we have to establish database development and test cases potentially for ongoing, like Performs has. So one of the other projects is Perfex2 that I mentioned previously, and that's the performance and evaluation of CTC colonography in symptomatic patients. And it's a comparison trial of reporting radiographers and subspecialty trainee radiologists undergoing a structured training programme. So these are people who have no formal training experience, reporting experience previously. And the primary objective is to demonstrate the effect of training on CTC interpretation. So CTC accuracy for colorectal lesions greater than 10 millimeters, which are typically found in patients with symptoms of colorectal cancer. The primary outcome measure will be the difference in the sensitivity and specificity for clinically important colorectal lesions between the baseline test case and the final test case datasets. The other outcomes will look at percentage of radiographers and trainee radiologists achieving the thresholds from the control arm, the sensitivity, the years of experience for radiographers and the training history that do well in the study, and the raw score comparison between radiographers and radiologists and knowledge on the knowledge questions. However, you'll have to wait for my John Nichols round to know any of the results. So I'd like to thank my supervisory team for their support and input into my PhD and also to this talk. And I'd also like to thank St Mark's Foundation and the Fortitude and the Academic Institute for their support with these projects, along with the National CT Academy team, who have been amazing. These are my references, and thank you for listening. Any questions?